Yesterday, I was talking about my attendance in this marriage workshop, marriage training. And how, as we were going through section by section, we were learning how typical couples respond in particular scenarios and better ways to act within those scenarios, ways in which responses would be better. And it showed that most marriages, if they apply these techniques, can become very good marriages. Even bad marriages can turn around. It's just ways of connecting people together in a more healthy way. And yesterday I was saying that when I was at this workshop, I was observing how myself and many devotees that I know don't have all these skills and qualities. And so naturally the question comes to our mind, well, if we're devotees and we're becoming more sattvic, wouldn't we naturally have these qualities? And doesn't a devotee naturally become expert at everything and naturally have all good qualities? And the answer is yes and no. What I've seen is that we all have different natures. And some people are just intuitively better at relationships. There are a lot of people that don't even need this workshop because intuitively they do all these things. And there are a lot of people that intuitively don't do all these things, and it's even difficult for them to learn. And those classes of people don't necessarily divide by the line of devotee and non-devotee. We find both scenarios in the devotee world and outside the devotee world. And so it's I think, an important point, because philosophy can confuse us, because according to philosophy, naturally, we should be very loving, kind, compassionate people if we're devotees. But loving, kind, and compassionate doesn't always manifest itself in a way that enhances every relationship. It may manifest in different ways. So even a loving, kind, compassionate person, maybe not so loving, kind, and compassionate with his or her daughter or son or husband or wife. It does happen. So some devotees may question, do we need to learn certain techniques to better enhance our relationships? And the answer is, well, that will depend on you. You have to look at the quality of your relationship. If you were to grade your relationships on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being excellent and 0 being poor, then just look at how you're doing. And if your relationships are all in the upper level, then we might say, by nature or by your advancement in Krishna consciousness, you know how to have a good relationship. If your relationships are not so good, then we can conclude by nature that's something lacking in you as a skill, or Krishna didn't give you that natural talent or natural insight or natural empathy that's required, or even desire. Some people are loners. They don't actually care so much about relationships. So that being the case, and relationships being so important for us as devotees, working together and having good sangha, then learning how we can improve relationships is obviously important, because although you might say, well, that's material, but it facilitates something spiritual. So as I was in this workshop, I was just kind of laughing at seeing the interactions between husband and wife, how funny they can be and how dysfunctional they can be at times, and remembering different devotees I know and their troubles and tribulations in marriage, and actually many devotees and common problems we all have and we all face as human beings and embodied in physical bodies with materially conditioned minds. And just acknowledging that this is difficult for non-devotees, it's difficult for devotees, is difficult for everyone. Coming together like this is a challenge. And part of the reason it's a challenge, and I've said this before, and this has been confirmed by other psychologists and scientists, is that in traditional cultures, the expectations and the needs of marriage were much different. It was more survival, raising family, to farm. Your wife was there to help you in the farming. It was a lot of it was survival. You chose your wife based on strength and health more than sexuality. And it was an extended family. And the needs that we have today as individuals are much different than the needs that people had hundreds of years ago. So some men, sometimes they find it so difficult to fulfill the emotional and relational needs of their wives. And I've also found that for myself. And I wondered, if we're supposed to fulfill those, why is it so difficult? And so many scholars have pointed out that these skills were not necessary in traditional cultures. Those things were being fulfilled by the extended family. And the man was more focused on achievement, which is the nature of men. They like to achieve, they like to work hard. And the nature of women is to have a beautiful family, beautiful children, and so forth. And so it's often a huge challenge for the men. And when it becomes a challenge for the men, it becomes a challenge for the women because they don't know how to deal with the man because he seems so aloof from the relationship, so independent and so wanting to be isolated a lot. And that wasn't a problem hundreds of years ago. It's a problem in today's culture. We live a much different life than people have lived in history. We live our lives in the cities. For lack of a better word, I would just say our lives in the cities are very weird and getting weirder all the time. And that's making marriage more difficult and more weird. And this idea of living together, that was never a thing of the past. This nuclear family was never a thing of the past. Growing up very close, boys and girls together, was not common. Even I heard an article in New York, like in the 20s or 30s, women could not rent an apartment alone. It would not be allowed. So, it's not so far back that things were a lot different. And it's not just Indian culture. It was like this way all around the world. So we are now faced with a challenge. And that's why adaptation is necessary. And that's why a lot of times we need this kind of training. It's not going to manifest just by being a good devotee because we're dealing with cultural changes which we were totally unprepared for. It's like saying, I'll go to war, I'll just chant more rounds and I'll be a better fighter. No, you better learn how to use a gun. So I think it's something like that. You better learn the tools and learn how to use them. And even if you chant more rounds, you might be better, but there may be tools that you need, weapons that you need that you don't have and you don't know how to use.